Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm your host, Jon Macri, and today is part 3 of our special Dynasty Rankings edition of the podcast, where it's now time to give some love to the defensive backs and focus on my top 20 for that position. Last week, I went over my top 20 linebackers, and it was top 20 edges the week before that. So please go back and listen or watch those if you haven't already. I think even rankings aside, if you're into, not into where those guys were ranked, there's a lot of really useful and unbiased information in there for about the positions as a whole, which I think could be helpful for IDP managers, new or old. And I'm going to continue providing some more position-based insight as well today for these DBs, and of course, rank my 20 favorites for Dynasty. So let's get it. All right, defensive backs. This includes both safeties and cornerbacks, although you won't find many cornerbacks inside the top 20 for me, purely because of the depth at the position where so many of those guys produce very similarly. So there's going to be a lot more safeties in here today. Again, I mentioned it last week. These are my updated dynasty ranks. I've actually even updated them further. I mentioned this in the episode prior, but we have the Dynasty Rankings article on PFF.com. I'll link that in the episode description. We did a full Dynasty Rankings episode prior to free agency and the NFL draft. So this is a freshening up version of that. But I have tinkered with the rankings a little bit more specifically for these defensive backs. So you guys are getting the most updated version here on the podcast and on YouTube if you're watching as well, which if you are, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me a ton. So I would really appreciate that. But yeah, we'll go through the DBs here next week. We'll focus on the defensive tackles. That'll complete the set basically for the dynasty rankings and IDP positions before we get into hashtag redraft season. So let's start with some information, right? We did this the last few episodes. We're going to provide some more insight for the defensive back position very quickly on the cornerbacks before anyone goes out or asks and spends up on guys like Deron Bland or Kenny Moore or Trayvon Diggs, whoever you think scored really well one year and is going to repeat that again. I would say please don't. Again, the position is so deep. It's the deepest position in IDP regardless of your scoring system. But actually, just to give an idea of that, I'll put a chart up here on the screen, kind of highlighting some of the key points here. And what you'll notice on that chart is that the deepest range of top scorers at the cornerback position, so guys that ranked 61 to 100 in scoring the year prior, whether you're looking at total points or points per game in that range, they scored the highest among all the other positions. So the 61 to 100 range of corners scored higher than the 61 to 100 range of linebackers, edges, and so on, right? So what that should tell you is simply that there is always going to be a bigger pool to choose from who at this position, who guys who can still be worthwhile starters in IDP, basically, right? And the other thing that you'll notice on that chart as well is that the difference in points and points per game from the top 5 scorers at the cornerback position to the 61 to 100 range is by far the smallest margin across all the IDP positions as well, right? So it's a 108 point difference in total points scored from the average top 5 scoring quarterbacks to the ranks 61 to 100 and on average, and just a 6.8 points per game difference from the top 5 cornerbacks to that range of 61 to 100, right? So the margins, as you can see, for every other position are much greater, with the edge position, who, we talked about 2 weeks ago as the most important position to address first in your drafts. That discrepancy is the greatest discrepancy across all positions, with a difference of 11.5 points per game from the top 5 to 61 to 100, and 191.4 points overall on average difference between those groupings of top 5 to 61 to 100, right? So obviously there's going to be big differences, but it's how much those differences range, and that's kind of why I wanted to highlight this, is that there isn't as big of a difference for cornerbacks, and it's also super unstable. So these guys are going to basically be interchangeable year to year as well, right? So that's why you won't see many cornerbacks here in the top 20 DBs for me. Now, the safeties, they are the more valuable scorers between them and cornerbacks. Again, kind of coming back to that chart, just looking at the difference in total points and points per game for each ranking cohort. Like safety holds a pretty big advantage there, like when comparing to the corners and the safeties, is which ones score higher from their top 5, top 12, top 24, top 36. Safety holds a pretty big advantage there, right? So that being said, those top scorers repeating year to year, the odds aren't great. So, we also have to kind of devalue these players a bit each offseason at defensive back, safety, and corner when we're doing either redraft or dynasty rankings, because so much changes on an annual basis. Actually, I'll throw up another chart. Uh, there we go. Yeah. So this chart, for folks who are interested in kind of seeing what that repeatability factor looks like at each position. Not amazing as a whole by any means for IDPs, for all IDP positions, right? DTs lead the way, followed by edge, and then linebacker as the strongest year-to-year correlation from fantasy points each season and points per game. But then when you get to cornerbacks and safeties, there's a massive drop off from the rest of the IDP positions. And we just have to keep that in mind when we're drafting year to year, is just not chasing last year's point totals with these two positions more than anything else. Like anyone who drafted Jalen Petre as a top 3 safety last year, they'll probably vouch for me on that one, because, there's guys like that every single year, right? And there might be even a couple on this list today, but the main thing that we're looking for at the safety position of a lot of the time has it just comes down to projecting their usage and their alignments in their respective defenses with players who are expected to get more favorable alignments, like box and slot snaps. They're generally going to be more consistent tacklers week to week, and then we'll hope for the insanely unstable big plays to help boost them even further. So I wrote an article this week, which will be out now on pff.com by the time you're listening to this, looking at safety alignment and tackle projections for the year ahead. So just taking past defensive coverage schemes and safety usage in order to project the most desired IDP safeties to target on each team based on those projections, if that makes sense. I explain it a little bit better in the article. So yeah, if that's something that interests you, go check it out on pff.com. I promise you won't find anything else like that on any other site. I may be biased, but I think it's pretty valuable information when projecting for the season ahead. So enough of that. Let's get into the rankings here and start off at the very top. My safety 1, Kyle the Hammer Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens. Kyle Hamilton, I mean, the main thing for me, like 1-year production, again, is not really factored in here. But the main thing is that in year 2, what he did was he already established himself as one of the elite players at his position. When I'm ranking safeties, it's a very similar approach to how I rank the linebackers, in that the players that I feel are going to have the most staying power in the NFL are going to be ranked first and foremost, and in these dynasty ranks. And Hamilton definitely has the long-term potential after a really excellent sophomore year. 90.1 coverage grade this past year, 86.0 overall grade, both of those among the best in the league. And the next part of it for me is that deployment and ideal IDP usage in the defense. And Hamilton definitely gets that in Baltimore, where he's able to deliver on big plays because he's put in those types of situations, like as a pass rusher, and then staying around the ball, lined up in the box and the slot a lot more. Like, he wasn't amazing as a tackler this past year, but again, you consider the instability in production for this position, and knowing that alignments are the key, that's what is going to put him among the top producers each year. And I'd expect that tackle efficiency specifically to come up in year 3 here for him. Number two for me, incredibly close to number one. Really, this top three, I'd say, are all in that same tier, but it's Antoine Winfield Jr. of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another young player who has, I think, established himself among the very best at the position. I mean, he just got paid like the best play as the best player at his position. So he's locked in as a long-term starter for the position, which you obviously love for him and feel as confident as is possible for the position in Dynasty with Antoine Winfield now getting that contract. So he's also coming off a great year. He ranked first in PFF grade, first in run defense grade, ninth in coverage grade, posted a really impressive plus 15.9 tackles versus expected. That was 93rd percentile. It's also a big play machine, which, it isn't something to bank on each week, but the great players like this, like they do tend to have a talent for being around the ball. So if I'm betting on a player to deliver those plays as consistently as you can, it's probably Antoine Winfield Jr. for me. So he's number two. And then finishing off that top tier for me, three, speak players who know how to make big plays while also being the very best tacklers at the position. He was dethroned from number one, but he's a very close 1C here for me in the ranks. It is the GOAT, Derwin James of the Los Angeles Chargers, and a position that, like I highlighted just a couple of minutes ago, like has next to no consistency year to year. Derwin has somehow managed to be that outlier and be among the most consistent producers at the position every single year when he's healthy and on the field. Like I have no reason to think that he won't be there again this year, right? Even with Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh coming in, I feel like Derwin, he's going to produce. That's what he does. He's going to be put in those positions to succeed, which he always has been. So he's the only safety to finish among the top five in tackles versus expected in each of the past 3 years. Again, it's just like that level of consistency at such an inconsistent position. You'll be hard pressed to find anywhere else. He will be 28 to start the season, which is fine for the safety position, but yeah, he's still king in my opinion. Derwin, absolutely in that top tier. Now, if there is a player who I would argue is knocking on the door of that top tier safeties just because of his age, because of his consistency as a tackler, getting those ideal alignments, it's number 4 on the list, and that is Jaquan Brisker of the Chicago Bears. So Jaquan Brisker coming off an excellent season where he ranked 97th percentile in tackles versus expected at plus 19.9, having missed 2 games, by the way, like, which is really impressive. So he was also the most effective tackler against the run at the safety position with plus 15.5 tackles versus expected. He's really like the ideal box safety for IDP. And now, thanks to his consistency as well as draft capital, age, like easily a top 5 dynasty safety for me. Coming back to that safety projection article that I wrote this week out now on PFF.com, the Bears defense does project to put him in ideal alignments once again this season, at a higher rate than average, which I think you like to see. So the team, they did sign Kevin Byard this offseason, who I think actually does have the versatility to maybe eat into those alignments of Brisker a little bit more, but I'd imagine Brisker is still going to get the lion's share there and put together another productive season as a tackler. So he's safety 4. Safety 5 is Cameron Curl, and now of the Los Angeles Rams. I really like Cameron Curl. I think he's one of the more underrated safeties in the league, just as far as that versatility that he can provide to a defense. Like we saw that last year in Washington. He delivered 111 tackles, ranked 80th percentile in tackles versus expected, was the safety 8 in PFF IDP scoring. He was safety 12 in points per game. Goes to a new team this offseason with the Rams, who don't necessarily project as like a great defensive scheme for safety production. In fact, actually, they ranked among the lowest in the league in my safety tackle projection article, but I think there's a good chance that Curl can kind of change that because of how effective he is in the box. And I think that's part of the reason the Rams brought him in and didn't address the linebacker position really at all this offseason. So that he could soak up a lot more of those secondary linebacker snaps next to Ernest Jones, which is going to make him incredibly valuable for IDP again, right? So for him, like he's been nothing if not as consistent as a tackler as you can get at the position, always delivering tackles above expected each year, which to me becomes even more impressive when taking into account the high percentage of snaps he played in the box. And I think, getting a nice 2-year deal there with the Rams buys him even more time now as that consistent IDP. Number 6 is Kyle Duggar. So Kyle Duggar of the New England Patriots also signed a new contract this offseason, extending with the Patriots for 4 more years. And, when we talk about versatility at the position and getting those ideal alignments, Duggar is him. Like he's the one of the guys that I'll always put in that bucket along with Derwin James and Cameron Curl. Like he's excellent in the box, but can be effective really regardless of where he lines up. He's shown that every year. He's coming off his most productive season with 103 total tackles, was safety 9 in the PFF preferred IDP scoring and safety 14 in points per game. He's now got the contract. He's going to continue to get the ideal IDP alignments on the field. And for that, he's just a strong bet to continue being productive as an IDP for the seasons ahead for me. So that's Kyle Duggar at 6. And at number 7, another guy where I think he's locked in as an NFL starter for years to come. It's Minkah Fitzpatrick of the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the better NFL safeties, but also, like, despite being more of your typical deep safety, he's been an elite tackler at the position. Even this year, playing just under 550 snaps, delivered plus 17.3 tackles versus expected, which was 95th percentile. That's really hard to do, to build about that much production on so few snaps relative to others at his position. So he's consistently done this somehow throughout his career, despite the typical deep safety alignments. Like I'd fully expect a bounce back year from him based on his history of production. Again, one of the more consistent producers in IDP. I'm definitely still a believer in him for Dynasty as well. All right, number 8. Here is the first and I think only cornerback. Yeah, he's the only cornerback within my top 20 DBs. It's Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions, who had an incredible rookie season. I mean, he was CB2 in points per game, CB3 overall, despite averaging just 77% of the defensive snaps on the season. That's insane to me. Like, don't get me wrong, Devon Witherspoon, like he was great last year as a rookie as well. He was CB1 in points per game, but he was also much closer to an every down player, which I think we can now project Branch to be heading into year 2. And if he comes anywhere close to his level of play last year, he's gonna blow this position out of the water. I'll be curious to see, how closely his usage ends up being to last year with, for Witherspoon specifically. Actually, why am I talking about? I'm comparing him to Witherspoon because these guys are both like slot heavy players. And for Witherspoon, I guess I would be curious to see, getting a new defensive coordinator, new coaching staff coming in there in Seattle, how closely his usage is going to be to repeating from last year. Where Branch, I don't think we really have to worry about that. And the main thing I think for him is that we can just expect more playing time for him in year 2, right? Like, incredibly encouraging year as he delivered elite tackles versus expected numbers in the 96th percentile for his position, on top of like a ridiculous 3.56% big play rate, which ranks second at the position. And then helping his case even more was that he did have excellent PFF grades across the board. So again, did all this without being a full-time player for most of the year. So have to imagine he'll have a larger opportunity in 2024, considering his high level of play, in which case I feel very good about him for dynasty purposes. I feel good about Devon Witherspoon as well, but for me, Branch is probably the only corner inside the top 20 for me. Number 9 is Grant Delpit of the Cleveland Browns, and another guy who had his season kind of derailed by injury, but what he was doing last year before that injury was, I think, really great for IDP purposes, right? Ranked 81st percentile in tackles versus expected at the position. And Delpit did so while getting, I think, some truly ideal IDP alignments in Jim Schwartz's defense, which, again, referencing that IDP safety projection article on PFF.com right now, Cleveland once again projects as a top defense for at least one safety for IDP, and that safety should absolutely be Grant Delpit. So He should be healthy for the new season as well. Really liked what we got from him this past year. I think he has an argument to be like that perennial 100 tackle player at this position as long as he's healthy. Also 25 years old, former second round pick. Like I like his chances of kind of sticking around here. Okay, one of the elite producers from last season was more than likely a top three safety in your scoring for 2023. And at number 10 on the list, it's Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Bates to me is one of those guys who I'm probably going to warn about drafting too highly in redraft this year because I can easily see him being a top 5 drafted safety this season as people chase the points from last year. Again, referencing that year to year consistency for the position, Bates doesn't have the benefit of that for the safety position or for his own production, really, right? Like he's not a Derwin or a Minka or a Winfield. Those guys who have done it consistently and, year over year, he doesn't really project as that type of player. You look at his 2022 season. If you're watching on YouTube, you could see his tackles versus expected numbers there. He was well under expected that season, then jumped up this season. Again, this season was insane, like coming off a really strong plus 31.1 tackles versus expected. Like that was the highest mark for the position. But, the thing to keep in mind on top of just overall production instability is that Bates very much is your typical deep safety in the NFL. And it's why you'll see his tackles versus expected numbers on the screen there across the years on the lower end. So you add in that they'll have a new defensive coordinator this year as well, which is going to shift the defense again, causing a little bit of a wrinkle in that reliability factor for Bates. So to me, probably one of the biggest regression candidates this year at the position. But all that said, like for redraft, yeah, he's more than likely going to be a fade for me. But what we've been focusing on all along here for the position from a dynasty perspective is that long-term staying power, right? And Bates definitely has that with his big contract in Atlanta. Also coming off a year where he posted top 3 marks in PFF grade, run defense grade, coverage grade. 27 years old, locked in as a starter for many more years. So dynasty, love him. Redraft this year, he'll be a fade for me. Number 11 is Xavier McKinney, who now of the Green Bay Packers, but yeah, much like Jesse Bates, coming off a big career year, right? Posted 115 total tackles, was 87th percentile in tackles versus expected, was a top 5 graded safety overall, number 1 in coverage for us this past year, safety 7 in the PFF IDP scoring last year, safety 11 in points per game, but also like Jesse Bates getting a slight change in scenery, right? As he joins a whole new team this year with the Packers. And we don't really know what Jeff Hafley's defense is going to look like. But the one thing that I think we can trust with Xavier McKinney is that he's locked in as a starter now with that contract. It was 4 years, 68 million, I believe it was. He's another one, probably will be lower in the redraft ranks for me, but love him for dynasty here. Again, as we just continue to bet on long-term potential and production near the top of the rankings. All right. Next up, it is Javon Holland of the Miami Dolphins. A Canadian boy sneaks into the top 12 for me. I've moved the ranks around a bit actually since my updated article at the beginning of May. I feel like I probably tinker with the DBs in these ranks the most. So yeah, don't be surprised to see if these rankings don't match up exactly with the article's ranking. I just can't help but move these guys around. But anyways, Holland moves into the top 12 here. And again, just that long-term confidence. He's a really good player, top 3 graded safety for us last year overall and in coverage. He was top 10 in run defense grade, was actually safety 9 in points per game last year in our scoring, but he did miss some time. We'll see what his role in the defense is going to look like this year with Vic Fangio gone. So now another new defensive coordinator in Miami for him to deal with. They also brought in Jordan Poyer, but either way, still really like Javon Holland's chances of sticking around in the NFL, and obviously that translates to me for him in Dynasty as well. So like Javon Holland, just inside the top 12. Safety 13 or DB 13, sorry. is Cameron Bynum of the Minnesota Vikings. So this is probably another guy who I think I'd be pretty shocked if his overall production doesn't regress from last year to this year. Um, I think Bynum definitely played well enough as a starter last year to provide some long term confidence. But I will say, like his 129 tackles plus 21.9 over expected, that was 98th percentile, probably not repeatable. Again, like Jesse Bates, he just doesn't have the history of consistency to kind of bank on. Like again, YouTube viewers, you can see how low how low under expectations he was in 2022. I'd be expecting something much closer to the mean this year for him, which doesn't mean he can't be good, but top 3, top 5 safety in IDP again, I'd say that's highly unlikely. Um, he might even be a little too high. Again, I want to tinker with the ranks. I don't know if I even love Cameron Bynum this high for Dynasty, but there's a good chance that this is where he's going to be drafted because of that big year last year. And I do think he'll be able to stick around as a starter in the NFL for a little while now, too, after proving himself as that starter last season. Um, Next up, a player who I was really confident in prior to free agency. I still am, but I did have to move him down a tiny bit. It's Jordan Battle of the Cincinnati Bengals. And the only reason I moved him down is because of the team bringing in both Von Bell and Geno Stone in free agency, which is, it just kind of makes Cincy a pain in the ass to project for 2024. Like, Battle was excellent last year when he started, but he didn't get a starting job until the latter half of the year where, his play and talent, it just pushed Nick Scott out of the starting lineup. And then they didn't even really fully unleash him in a true full-time role. Despite grading like incredibly well as a rookie, top 20 across the board. His production was among the best at the position as well. 96th percentile in tackles versus expected. Like, I think Battle will be a starter, probably alongside Geno Stone, if I had to guess. But Von Bell being there, it's kind of annoying, right? He probably cuts into Battle snaps some. You got Dax Hill there as well, but I think it sounds like Dax Hill is going to be moved to more of a slot role. But that also takes away maybe some of the ideal alignments for somebody like a Jordan Battle, because they also have Mike Hilton who plays the slot quite a bit. So the slot being one of those nice alignments for IDP. So I don't expect, Von Bell obviously to be there long term or to be like such a long term thorn in the side. But I do love Jordan Battle. I think long term confidence in him is pretty high after watching him last year. So he's DB 14, and then DB 15 is Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals for me. I wrote about him this week as a bounce back candidate for 2024. The guy has been one of the most consistent IDPs at the position for years. And last year it was a down year. I don't think, it's anything to panic about, though. I don't think it's nearly enough for us to kind of abandon ship on a player that is still one of the elite tacklers at the position and has been for a while. He ranked 90th percentile in tackles versus expected last year. He just didn't get the big play luck that some of his peers did, right? Like, he failed to record an interception for the first time since 2019, didn't force a fumble for only the second time in his career, didn't tally even a half sack for just the second time in his career, and also didn't break up a pass for the second time in his career, right? Like, that on its own created the perfect storm of just kind of mid IDP production for 2023, where he ranked outside the top 24 in points per game. So knowing that, knowing how effective he still is as a tackler, knowing how unstable big plays are, and how they tend to regress to the mean. Plus, he missed time last year. Like, I'm kind of all in on Budda Baker bouncing back and getting back into the good graces of IDP managers this year. I'd be very happy getting him in this range, even as my safety one for Dynasty at this point. Okay, so here's where I get maybe a little crazy. Maybe because I love Josh Metellus of the Minnesota Vikings. Somehow, when I put my Dynasty article together, he didn't copy over when I was moving names from my spreadsheet to the Word doc, and then got missed completely for the article. And a shout out to Fatams2 for bringing it to my attention. Fatams2, I think that's how you say it on Twitter. Because yeah, I'm high on Metellus, who I've even since moved up to safety 15, since he was safety I think 19 in the spreadsheet at the time. He's now DB 16 for me. Metellus is literally everything we can dream of for an IDP with a safety designation, okay? In that he doesn't play traditional safety at all and really is more like a linebacker than anything, right? He was essentially a full-time player last year alongside both Harrison Smith and Cameron Bynum, thanks to Brian Flores' three safety defense. And I'd expect more of the same this year. Metellus only spent 55 of his 1,063 defensive snaps from a deep safety alignment. Like, that's hilarious and probably deserving of losing that safety designation. But, I'm not going to tell that to fantasy platforms if you don't. So 92% of his snaps were spent either in the box, the slot, or along the defensive line, which gave him prime tackle opportunities and chances to rush the passer. And he absolutely made the most out of those opportunities. I mean, I just expect more of the same from Flores and Metellus this year. And if even if it's just for one more year, I don't care, because that level of usage and deployment is as good as it gets for IDP safeties. And yeah, I'll spend up in Dynasty to get that on my roster if I'm a competing team. Like, he'll probably be higher than this for me in redraft as well. So love Josh Metellus. I mean, even if you're not fully sold on him, I think a former 6th-round pick, like for beyond this year, the usage and the deployment are just too juicy to avoid for Dynasty, especially in this kind of range. So I'm all for taking the shot here. Okay, Jalen Petrie, he does get on the list here as DB 17. Petrie of the Houston Texans. Not a player I love. He was a big fade for me last year after that insanely productive rookie year. He's actually probably a good example to point to for guys like Jesse Bates and Cameron Bynum, but still very young, 2nd-round capital to his name, can be productive and an effective IDP, though we'll likely never repeat that rookie year production. I'm betting he'll still be drafted highly in Dynasty and redraft just based on that 2022 year alone. So yeah, if you want Petrie, this is probably the latest that you'll be able to get him. Just be sure not to set expectations too high for him. That defense wasn't nearly as ideal for him under D'Amico Ryans as it was the year before that. So again, just more things to kind of keep in mind, but I think still very productive safety relative to his usage. All right, another safety or slot or whatever that you want to call him here. It's CJ Gardner-Johnson of the Philadelphia Eagles. I had to include him here because he's such a fun player. Just signed a 3-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. So, after bouncing around a bit, he gets a little bit more stability, I guess, just for us to bank on long term. And that helped him get inside this top 20 for me, just having that contract and that stability, because he has a history of being a really effective IDP, whether it's with big plays or as a tackler. He does get the ideal usage to play to his skill set, help boost that production floor a little bit as well. Like, I think he'll play more slot in Philly. But even if not, like, he'll be the safety to kind of rotate down toward the line of scrimmage as well, which we obviously love for IDP, right? So he did miss a big chunk of last year with an injury, but should be fully healthy, ready to go this season. And I think great potential for strong IDP production in that defense. Okay, DB 19 and DB 20. I'm going to lump together here because I'm taking a bit of a swing at the position now and including a couple of rookies. It's Cole Bishop of the Buffalo Bills and Tyler Nubin of the New York Giants. So both guys were 2nd-round picks this past year. Nubin was selected ahead of Bishop. And, even though I have Bishop ranked ahead, they're basically super close. Treat them however you like. But for me, as much as I think Nubin has a better shot to start this year in New York, like if and when Bishop gets his starting spot, potentially this year, I just like his potential for production a bit more. He was really good and effective around the line of scrimmage in college at Utah and how they deployed him. And I think he'll continue to get those favorable alignments in Buffalo, where Nubin might not be used as heavily in that regard. So that was kind of just the tiebreaker for the two. For me, I do think Nubin, again, better opportunity to start this year, but I think once Cole Bishop gets on the field, I think there's a really nice opportunity for production for him based on his history of usage and how effective he is in that role. So they're high on this list, but I like both of them quite a bit coming out. Like I think they can deliver strong years as rookies and potentially climb. I think I actually initially had them even higher in my article at like 12 and 13 or something. I may have been a victim of rookie hype there. Even I'm guilty of it on occasion, but I think they're now probably more appropriately ranked here, second round picks this year, who I think are going to see the field and get a chance to produce in good defenses to do so. So yeah, Cole Bishop and Tyler Nubin round out the list for me. So I guess we'll just do like a quick recap here of the top 20 DBs for me. So number one was Kyle Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens. Number two was Antoine Winfield Jr. of the Buccaneers. Derwin James, number three. Jaquan Brisker was number four, the Chicago Bears. Cameron Curl, now of the Los Angeles Rams, number five. Kyle Duggar, Patriots, six. Minka Fitzpatrick, Pittsburgh Steelers, seven. Brian Branch, Detroit Lions, eight. Grant Delpit was number nine of the Cleveland Browns. Number 10 was Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons. Number 11 was Xavier McKinney of the Packers. Number 12 was Javon Holland of the Dolphins. Number 13 was Cameron Bynum of the Vikings. Number 14 was Jordan Battle of the Bengals. Number 15 was Budda Baker of the Cardinals. Number 16, my guy Josh Metellus of the Vikings. Number 17 was Jalen Petrie of the Texans. Number 18 was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, or CD Deuce, or CJ Gardner-Johnson, or however you want to say his name. And number 19 and 20 was Cole Bishop of the Bills and Tyler Nubin of the Giants. So that's going to do it. Thank you all, as always, for tuning in. If you are on YouTube, I ask that you please like and subscribe, because it really does help me a ton. So let's the good folks at PFF know that IDP information is valuable as well. So be heard and show some love for IDP, even if it's not for me specifically. That's okay. I appreciate you all. If you're looking for more safety and DB information, again, I wrote up what I think could be a really helpful article in just kind of identifying the top safeties to target for IDP in 2024 by projecting their defensive schemes and deployments. So you could check that out now, and I'll look to get that linked into the episode description, as well as the full Dynasty rankings article. So even though, yeah, you guys got the newest information with this episode after I did some tinkering with the DB ranks in those Dynasty rankings. But next week, Dynasty defensive tackles, that'll be fun. No Aaron Donald, so we might have to have like a 99-minute moment of silence for tribute on the episode for him. But going to be fun to sort out where those guys all land now with the king of the DTs retiring. But again, thank you all for listening and your support. And until next time, peace out.